Right, welcome back from Davos in Switzerland. We'll now move over to Abuja here in Nigeria. That's the strength of a global network like Arise. We already know the 2020 finance bill, which is now a law after President Muhammadu Buhari gave his assent. The new value-added tax rate of 7.5% has already taken effect.
That's right. The new law, which is expected to promote fiscal equity, reform domestic tax laws, and introduce tax incentives for investments in infrastructure and capital markets. It is also expected to support micro, small, and medium-sized businesses in line with the nation's ease of doing business reforms and help raise government revenue. A major component of the law is the increase of the value-added tax from 5% to 7.5%, as contained in the 2020 budget. Some tax experts have hailed the president for the go-ahead of signing this bill.
However, it is one thing to sign the bill, another thing is to implement. Also, the economic importance of this new development on the Nigerian tax-paying population, who to some extent are still trying to come to terms with the merits and demerits of the new value-added tax. So joining us now from our Abuja studio is Sesugh Akume, a public affairs analyst, spokesman for Abundant Renewal Party, ANRP, which was the party's House of Representatives candidate for Sankera in Benue State in 2019. Great to have you, Akume. Let's just quickly talk about Akume. Just inundate us with what the new finance bill is all about before we set up the conversation.
The new finance bill is an excellent piece of legislation. All the other parts of the legislation are just proper and perfect, so to speak. They're proper. They stimulate business. They reversed our former tax regime, which made things difficult for small businesses, and multiple taxation and making things difficult for businesses. Multiple taxation, like I said, and making things difficult. But now it's more of a progressive taxation system whereby the more money you make, you pay a bit more on the excess, the more you make, and then it categorizes companies in different categories, also promotes small businesses. Those aspects are commendable. They're very proper, and it's what we should do. The part that totally undermines the law is the 7.5% VAT, which is an increment from the 5% VAT. That is a completely bad idea, and it undermines the law almost in its entirety.
You've said that this is a bad idea. However, the new VAT rates are expected to help increase the federal government revenue. And the money that comes from this is expected to be deployed to fund health and education sectors as well as infrastructure projects. Isn't that a good thing?
It's a good thing on paper, but in reality, it's not a good thing. Even on paper, I doubt whether it's a very good thing, because the premise on which the VAT increment was made is false and faulty, and every other thing along the stages of the VAT policy, the new 7.5 VAT policy. First and foremost, you may wish to recall that in May last year was when the issue of an increment in VAT was first mooted. The regime had said that it will be between 6.9 and 7.2 VAT in order to help state governments to pay the 30,000 naira minimum wage. That was the first thing they said. That was the basis on which they were going to increase the VAT, because they said in the absence of the increment, it wouldn't be possible to pay the 30,000 naira minimum wage. We all know that is not true, because it is not necessarily true that when the state governments get more money, it is deployed the way it should. It is also not true that there has to be a VAT increment before the minimum wage can be paid. So it's a false premise. And then so many other things aligned with it. There's so many things the government tells us they're going to be doing with our money, but they don't do it, and there's no accountability around it. Let me state from the outset that nobody likes paying taxes. Nobody, all over human beings, we don't like paying taxes. But for people who pay taxes and are made to pay taxes, it's because when you see the application of the taxes and the benefit to you, then you're motivated to pay. That's not what's done in Nigeria. What our monies, our taxpayers' funds are used for, they're either wasted or they're embezzled, and there's no accountability around it. And so it doesn't add up. And then you now put together the negative effects of this increment, you know that it's a bad idea. It wasn't a good idea to do the other positive aspects of the finance law, which was going to boost our economy and stimulate our economy and make small businesses grow and become more productive with less stifling laws and rules, and then undermine it by increasing the VAT, which has negative effects. So it's in the other way around, cancels the positive effects of that in the other way around, so to speak, and makes things even more difficult for us.
A lot of people argue with you, Akume, and say, at VAT rate, when you look at the West African sub-area, it's already low compared to the other countries. And the reason why all those good things you want government to do have not been done thus far is because government revenue and collection is quite low. Correct me if I'm wrong, the government doesn't collect up to 10 trillion every year in revenue, but there are lots and lots of other projects. Take, for instance, the Ibadan-Kano Railway project. You know how much that's going to go up? That's in the billions of US dollars. We want to do we want to do all of this. Isn't it by collecting enough revenue by government amidst all the channels? That's how we're going to get it.
First, let me agree that Nigeria is a rather poor country. Our revenues are very low. That's a fact. I'll put in context. The 10 trillion naira we're talking about in the 2020 budget is just about $30 billion. The Americans in 2019 spent $75 billion on their pets. So private citizens had 75 billion naira to spend on their pets. I'm not talking about other things like education or health or all of those. That's not even what I'm talking about. I'm talking about on their pets. For you to spend such money on your pets, it means you've taken care of other important, more critical and important things for you to have that much to spend on pets. That's more than twice the amount of our total budget. And and like we said, our earnings are not even up to $30,000 a year. So it's true that we do not have money, and we should we have with this is that there's so many other ways of raising these funds that we're not even exploring. The NNPC MD told us last year, by June, that in the first 6 months of the year, 22 million barrels of crude oil were stolen in 6 months. And it was expected that between June and December, the amount would rise, not decrease. When you're talking about 22 million barrels of crude oil, it means that it's about 110,000 barrels of crude oil stolen every day. 110,000 barrels of crude oil is more than what half of OPEC oil-producing countries produce. That's the amount in a year. So what is stolen in a day in Nigeria is more than what other countries produce in a year. And we're comfortable with that, and we sit back and say that, well, 22 million barrels were stolen, it's even going to be more. They're not talking about stopping that. If you put 22 million barrels of crude oil at $50, for instance, per barrel, we're talking, how much are we talking about? We're talking billions of dollars that we're just wasting. Nobody's accounting for. The other side about the infrastructure they talk about is many of those things are false. In my constituency in Sankera, where I'm from, in the 2017 budget, a bridge called Katsina Bridge costed 250 million naira to do a 1 kilometer bridge. Just last September, the Ministry of Works and Housing told us that the same bridge for the same specification was going to go for 3.77 billion naira. That's a move from 250 million naira to 3.7 billion naira. What I'm saying is not speculation. I did an FOI request at the Ministry of Works and said, how did this move from 250 million naira to 3.77 billion naira? I did not get a response. I've had to sue the Ministry of... But please, let me make the point. Let me make the point. So many of the things we're told that the monies are spent on, it are not so. So you can be told that so and so amount is spent on this, but when you're not watching, that's not what it goes for. That's the aspect about no accountability. I also did an FOI request to the Ministry of Finance to ask, was this money released? No responses. So when you tell us that you're going to be spending so and so billions of money on so and so infrastructure, and we don't see any accountability about it, it's taxpayers' money.
Okay, Mr.
I'm not supposed to be comfortable that you're calling amounts that cannot be justified.
Hello, Mr. Akume, I want to come here because of time real quickly. And Shaitan will have to come in to ask a question. But Mr. Akume, you made a very simplistic calculation as regards 22 million barrels, and you say if you're benchmarking against $50 per barrel, and you say you get millions. That's not the way proceeds from oil are calculated. There are oil sharing contracts There are oil sharing formulas. Some other people, like other companies that are part of these joint ventures, take their share from all of this. So it's not as simplistic as that. Just to correct that for the sake of the general public. All right, Shaitan, real quickly, your question.
Very quickly, we are going on a break in 60 seconds. Let's talk about the focus on compliance and the tax efficiency collection system. Now, does this finance bill address this? What changes are being made? And the implementation, of course. How do we make sure that there's no gap between what is expected to be collected and what we actually collect?
In the first place, the government itself was neither here nor there about when the implementation is, which shows that they didn't do their homework properly in the first place. The Accountant General last week said that implementation starts immediately. In fact, it started on Monday after the law was signed into law. Afterwards, the Minister of Finance said it's going to start in February, on February 1st. So here you have the government itself is not being very clear and concise about how to implement the law itself. So there's a lot of homework that needs to be done, and so many other things about its implementation. The other side of it is many people, the way I see it is that...
Mr. Akume, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. We're coming back to you after this break. You land on your point. We're going on a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back. You're still watching Arise News. Morning show. We're still joined in our Abuja studios by Mr. Akume, a public policy analyst and the spokesman for ANRP, Abundant Nigeria Renewal Party. Now, before the break, I was talking about focusing on compliance and the implementation of this new increase, the 7.5 VAT increase. Can you land on your point, please?
Yes, please. My point was that the government itself didn't get its homework properly in place because, like I said, last week, the Accountant General has said that implementation starts on Monday. On Tuesday last week or so, on the 17th, when the law was signed by the President. And implementation started immediately, only for the Minister of Finance to say that it's going to start on the 1st of February, giving a breather for the law to be implemented. My point is that within the same government itself, there are contradictory announcements on when the implementation starts. As a matter of fact, the Accountant General had said that he had ordered for a certain payment to reflect the 7.5%. My point is that even from the drafters of the law and the policy, there's no coherence in it. And it now shows, that's just one point showing that a lot of homework that needed to be done in order to make it work the way it should wouldn't be done. The other side of it is, like I said, because it is a bad policy and it's going to be affecting people negatively, I'm not very optimistic on how it's going to be collected the way it should because of the negative aspects of the law. But before I stop on that, let me say that when I said 22 million barrels and I said at $50, I did not give a specific amount of how much Nigeria would have been making. The point is, it still translates into billions of dollars that are being lost by theft. That's the bottom line of it. Nobody can argue that 22 million barrels lost in 6 months, it's a good thing, and that it doesn't translate into billions of dollars lost for Nigeria. I just needed to clarify that for the record.
Okay, Mr. Akume, real quickly, I just want you to, let's talk about the impact of this finance bill, 7.5%. I mean, what are the commodities, really, that are going to be vetted? And are these commodities people on the streets buy? The average Nigerian out there, you know, the part of the 100 million Nigerians, that is close to 100 million Nigerians that say live in abject poverty, are part of these people. Are these commodities part of the things people will buy? And how would it impact market forces in the country?
Very much so. Very much so. This is going to impact negatively on all of us in different ways, including the 100 million of us who live on less than 700 naira a day. Because there's going to be an increment in the price of everything, maybe just excluding the few things that were not vetted in the first place. Because when the government says that the 7.5% does not include certain items, food items, bread, flour, all of those, it didn't cover, it wasn't so when it was 5% either. So it's not as if there's some things that were VATed before that now are not being VATed. It's the same things that weren't VATed then that are not VATed now. But it's going to cause an inflation, an increment in price. For instance, if any commodity, let's say toothpaste, costed 100 naira, it meant that the VAT on it was 5 naira because VAT was 5%. Now it's going to go to a bit above 100 naira, maybe let's say 102 naira or 102 naira 50 kobo. That's an increment in price. That's already inflation. Right now we're already dealing with inflation. As at December last week, the Nigeria Bureau of Statistics told us that our inflation is already standing at 11.98%. It's growing. Inflation is growing. When you have an increment in price because there's an increment in the VAT, it means there's more inflation. That's not something we should be dealing with at this time. That's why implementing this 7.5 increment at this time was not a good idea. And then because many more people would be holding back on buying, because if toothpaste used to be 100 naira, for instance, now it's 102 naira or 103 naira or something, I wouldn't be buying toothpaste as frequently and freely as I should have. Then it affects the people selling. Then it affects the people making. Then it affects the people supplying, and so on and so forth. That's it. Everybody pays electricity bills. Electricity bills are VATed. It's going to affect everybody in a negative way. And like I said, because it's affecting the people purchasing, and because we're not getting any richer, our economy, inflation is at 11%, like I said. And our economy is growing at 2%. That's what we aim at. Note that in China, the economy grew at just 6% last year, and they said that was the poorest in 30 years. We aim at growing at 2%, and yet inflation is growing much more, which means our lives are not getting better, which means we wouldn't be spending more, which means less and less VAT will be collected. It doesn't help anybody. This policy is wrongly timed. It's not properly done. I think it's not a good idea. I think they should reverse it and make things a bit easy for everybody.
Okay, Mr. Akume, according to the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, they conducted a survey funded by the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation, Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation, where they conducted a survey that shows that about 78% of Nigerians still have a trust deficit problem with paying their taxes. Now, my question to you is, how do we begin to change that mindset of the average Nigerian so that they can see that paying tax is the duty, is the right of every citizen, and that can only help in boosting the economy?
It goes back to what you said at the outset. Nobody likes paying taxes. Everywhere taxes are paid, nobody likes paying taxes. The only reason people pay taxes is because, first and foremost, they see their taxes at work. That's the first part. The second part is there's enforcement. But there's only an extent to which enforcement can go if people are not paying their taxes or happy or willing to pay their taxes. It doesn't happen in Nigeria because, first and foremost, like I said, much of the money is stolen. The projects are inflated, like the example I gave you earlier, and then our monies are wasted. Just 2 weeks ago or so, a private citizen, the daughter of the president, was flying our private jet on taxes that we pay. Is that supposed to make me happy? Is that supposed to make me want to pay more taxes? Because I know it's going to be wasted, and then you're going to rub it in my face and tell me I can do nothing. You don't treat citizens like we're conquered people and we don't have an option. We have to pay. It does not work. That's part of the reason we find difficulty in paying our taxes when we should, how we should, and properly the way it should be done. And then the enforcement mechanisms too are very weak and porous. But more importantly, it's about let us see value for our money. Let there be accountability. I cannot make an FY request on how my money is spent and you refuse doing it and I have to go to court to do that. It's not going to make me want to pay. I will only pay because I have to pay. And for many people who can get away with it, they will get away with it. So it starts with putting the house in order and doing things properly in the first place.
Right, but real quickly, Mr. Akume, here, a lot of people argue with you and saying, we're just taking the 7.5% VAT out of that finance bill and isolating as an isolated case. Let's not forget the fact that companies that make between 0 to 25 million naira in this country are not paying income tax. Those that make between 25 to 100 million are paying 20% income tax, company tax. And those that are making over 100 million are paying the normal 30%. So there's a threshold to that. And companies that make less than 25 million, they form the gamut of that circle that we say over 41 million SMEs in this country. So given those tax holidays, it's not going to incentivize business in the first place. You're not talking about that.
I spoke about that. I think I've been as honest as possible. I said all of those are positive parts. Making small businesses to thrive, making things easier for them. As a matter of fact, under the last regime, small businesses used to pay multiple taxes. With that, it would have boosted the economy, to have made businesses thrive more, which means they're producing more and they're able to employ people more, and people have some more money to spend and feel a bit more free and a bit more relaxed. Afterwards, when the government justifies its use of our monies and that, then you can talk about an increment. But all of that is not happening. Just today in the media, there's some states who are saying that they will not be paying the 30,000 naira minimum wage, and they're not going to be doing that, even though there's going to be an increment in taxes. So it doesn't add up. It's better to do one thing right and then do the other one. You don't do something right and then undermine it with another thing that is done. That's why the 7.5% is going to affect everybody negatively, including the small businesses. Even though they're giving tax breaks, they're still going to be paying 7.5% VAT. So it doesn't add up. It's better to stay consistent and get the value for it, and then we can still get all the monies we need to do all the things that need to be done.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Akume, but I think there's a VAT exemption too. Or was the VAT kept in place for the small businesses? I think there's a VAT exemption too. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
I think there's a VAT exemption too for the small businesses, or was the VAT put in there for the small businesses?
No, there isn't.
Okay.
So there is no VAT exemption?
No, there isn't.
Okay, so with the finance...
No, there's no VAT exemption for small businesses, no.
Okay, Mr. Akume, so with the Finance Bill 2019 or 2020, we don't know what it's called yet. We see that it was submitted with the 2020 budget and will be subject to review yearly going forward. Now, I want to ask you this. Can you tell me other ways in which we can increase the tax bracket so that we don't see an increase in the value-added tax by this time next year?
It's possible. We have taxes in our laws that we're not implementing. Let me use one example, property taxes. We're supposed to be paying ground rents, we're supposed to be paying taxes on our properties. Assuming that we're doing that, we wouldn't have the thousands of houses and estates in Abuja and Lagos and elsewhere where nobody's occupying them, they're not put to use, and nothing is going on in them, and on and on. If people who owned houses or estates and all of those were paying something, even if it is a little, then they'll be forced to put them to use. Then it's going to be beneficial to everybody. We're not collecting any of those. That's why we just build many houses and leave them there. It's dark money. It's not being put to use. Money is supposed to be currency, supposed to be in motion. That's just one aspect. There's so many other areas that we're supposed to be taxing little by little that we're not infecting those. But primarily, I'll still come back to the part where I said that if we see our taxes being put to use as they should, if the government is accountable, then it is going to be easier for us to not avoid paying taxes or evade paying the taxes. Then we can do all of those. And for the numerous other channels that businesses can be made to function, it will. Let me give you an example. In Apapa, before goods leave Apapa to Ikorodu Road, other people, it takes a long time. We need to make things easy for those to grow. And then there's so many bottlenecks that stifle businesses. All of those are not necessary. I'll still go back to the border closure. It's a bad idea. The data is showing us that
Mr. Akume,
the inflation that is going on. Please let me land on this. Yeah.
We have a quick break coming up very soon.
It's a bad idea.
Land on that. Yeah, go ahead. Just land on that, and we'll go to the break and come back to you.
Yeah, please let me. It's a bad idea. There's so many policy inconsistencies that can be done away with that stimulate the place and make businesses thrive and grow. And taxes can be collected, and Nigeria can make money. It doesn't benefit anybody that
we'll go to a quick break, and we'll come back to you. And we'll talk some more about this. Your stance. We'll be right back. All right, still morning show here on Rise News. We still have Mr. Akume, Public Affairs Analyst. But Mr. Akume, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, you're calling for us to look at property taxes, but you don't want VATs. I mean, what's your stance? Is it in a country where we have an housing deficit of over 12 to 20 million, that a sizable portion of people in Lagos stay in shanty towns? Is that where you want to have property taxes? I mean, by any chance, do you see the uproar that the land use charge generated in Lagos? I thought you would have called for increased government revenue through other forms rather than taxing the people more on property taxes. You want to talk on that?
To put the record straight, I'm not against VAT. I'm not against VAT. I'm not against the 5% VAT. I'm only against the 7.5% VAT, the 2.5% increase on the VAT. I did not say we shouldn't have VAT at all. I did not also say that we shouldn't collect taxes. We should collect taxes, apart from being a right of the citizen to pay taxes, like you had said earlier. It's actually a responsibility for us to pay our taxes too. So I only gave one of so many examples. There are so many examples of how we can increase our tax collection. There are little areas where we could have been collecting taxes where we're not. There's so many others. For instance, we don't even monitor our traffic. If people pay taxes, pay fines, little fines here and there for traffic infringements, we could raise lots of money to fund our police departments. That's how other people do it. And like the other example I gave about stolen oil, which nobody's talking about, and actually assuring us that this stealing is going to increase, that's another one. And then other bad policies stop the growth of our economy. I was talking about the border closure. I'm not speaking as giving my opinion. I'm referring to data released by the Nigeria Bureau of Statistics, which shows that the border closure is affecting us. It's helping increase inflation. Even food inflation is at 67%. It grew from 14.48% just in November. Things are getting more difficult. If things were a bit easier, then people can thrive some more. We can live better, and then everything will function better. With the little that we have, we're not using it judiciously the way we should. We're wasting it and not being accountable for it. If we're faithful with the little that we have, not wasting it and not being unaccountable about it, then we could get much more done, and citizens will be more willing to cooperate and pay their taxes when they should, and the government too can get more functional. The other elephant in the room is electricity that's very difficult to get, and the government doesn't seem to have a hang on, and there is no hope in view. It makes life very difficult for us and makes businesses not to thrive, and because it's from our being productive that the government can raise money. It's not from any other thing. So if we're not productive and we're not competitive and things are really difficult, even surviving is difficult, then it's going to be a complex one. I think the government should get more hands-on and fold their sleeves and tackle these issues and get their policies in order so that we can have a functioning and thriving society where we can create wealth as we should.
When you correct me if I'm wrong, right? Nigeria is a consumption-based economy. And if we reduce the people's capacity to buy goods and services, we stand a chance of shrinking the economy. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yes, indeed. I'm saying that we can be a productive people. We should be made productive. We are willing to be productive. I don't think that Nigerians are a lazy people. We're trying too hard. And the government is making things even more difficult for us because inflation is increasing. With the new policy, inflation is even going to go up more. And then you're struggling with electricity, providing your own electricity, providing your own security. And then the little money that we have, you're spending it without accounting for it. Like I gave an example, in the 2016 budget, I can give another example. There's a bridge that costed 600 million naira in my constituency, and then when the budget was passed in June of 2017, and by July, the minister was saying the bridge was for rehabilitation. So what happens to the 600 million naira? It's very aggravating. That's the part about the lack of accountability. And then for us being productive, the more you're trying, the more difficult things are. That's why the finance law for 2019 finance law, which was just signed, it's a good one. But the 2.5% 5% increment on VAT is going to undermine it. If it were let to be that way, then businesses can thrive more. Small businesses can thrive more because we have more of small businesses. And small businesses run the economy. They employ people. If you employ 5 people or 2 people or that, but when things get difficult, businesses are going to be having to lay off some staff. This is what should be looked at, quite frankly.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the finance bill. The taxation, like you talked about, of the petroleum industry was there. There's now a petroleum tax that has been reviewed that goes to about, give or take, over 60, 70, 80% threshold. And also, I want you to also talk about that and talk about the new digital tax. The Minister of Technology now is the Minister of Technology and Digital Economy. And there's a tax there on digital transactions. Isn't that going to raise a lot of money? Because recently, take for instance, France as a country had a tax called the GAFA tax for Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple. It was a 4% tax, and it was to raise a lot of money for the French economy and to, calm the Gilets jaunes protesters in France. What would you like to say about these 2 areas? Is it viable to raise more money for the government?
We still go back to the issue we've been talking about. The money the government has already, how has it been using it judiciously in the first place? We'll still go back to that. How has it been accountable in how it's used? When we mention France and all the other countries, it's not that people that don't like paying taxes and all of that, but the thing is functional and they earn the right to introduce more taxes. In Nigeria right now, I would say that introducing more taxes would not be a good idea at this time. It would be better to put our house in order in all the other ways outlined, and then we can go ahead doing those. But for the little ones that have been collected, I'm not saying they should stop that. Just be accountable on it, collecting more effectively. Then we can look at increasing that so that we can earn more money. We are a poor country. We don't earn much, by the way, like the context I had given earlier. So it's true that we need to raise more money. We need to do all of those. But how are we using the money? How is it going to be impacting on us? Because the 2020 budget, much of it is going to run recurrent expenditure. It's going to be running the government. They're going to be spending the money on themselves. The system is inbred. It's designed to take care of itself. Most of the money is going to run recurrent expenditure. Recurrent expenditure actually increased in 2020. For what reason? The next high thing the government is spending money on is on debt servicing. What are we collecting the debts for? And we're spending more on debt servicing.
The
least is capital expenditure, which doesn't affect me.
And the petroleum taxes in the finance bill I talked about. Can you inform the audience more about that?
No.
The petroleum and the digital taxes in the finance bill, please.
Yeah. So for the digital tax, like I said, it's going to be implemented in the next few days from February. It's also, I would have preferred for it to be deferred, but it's going to be implemented. It's also going to add an increment to how much we're going to be paying. It's going to be affecting us in that way too. And for the petroleum one too, I don't even like talking much about the petroleum part because we spend so much. We spend so much on it by way of so much wastage on it. Getting some more taxes that are going to be going back to the consumer, it's not a good idea. We just got a report today that 123 billion naira loss was recorded on our refineries, and then we're still going to be collecting taxes which go to the consumers. I don't think that's proper.
Right,
so, but would say the bill really needs to be reviewed.
Okay, I'd like to thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for throwing light on this and educating the audience. That's our show for you today.
February 1 to be official, 7.5% increase in the VAT.
I'm Rafai Seni.
And I am Sheito Atigari. Thank you for watching. You can also follow us on all the social media handles showing now on the screen. This is Arise News.